The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Glory to you, Lord. While still more people gathered in the crowd, Jesus said to them, "This generation is an evil generation. It seeks a sign, but no sign will be given it, except the sign of Jonah. Just as Jonah became a sign to the Ninevites, so will the Son of Man be to this generation. At the judgment, the Queen of the South will rise with the men of this generation, and she will condemn them, because she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. Yet there is something greater than Solomon here. At the judgment, the men of Nineveh will arise with this generation and condemn it, because at the preaching of Jonah they repented, and there is something greater than Jonah here." The Gospel of the Lord. Signs, of course, are always very interesting if one notices them. And yet, you have to note that signs ultimately are external. Otherwise, they wouldn't be called signs. They're there to be seen. But the point would be that, do we have the eyes to see that they are signs of God? It's pretty simple, really. Even obvious that Jesus is the sign himself, of course. His mercy, his power, his healings, his miracles, his preaching, his compassion, the cross. Jesus is the sign, ultimately. Signs are not unimportant. We all need signs. And I suppose, like the gift of tongues, there is inevitably and importantly the interpretation of tongues. What good is the gift of spirit tongue if no one's interpreting it? You certainly will remember, and there's many other examples, for some reason this comes to mind now, you will recall on 9/11, that treacherous day, and people would say, "Oh yeah, that's a sign of God's judgment on the wealth of our country and consumerism and the wealthy and the rich." It would seem to me that it was a misreading of the sign. As the crowd got bigger, naturally humans are going to, they want to see cool things. Do another sign, heal somebody else. How does he do that? It's interesting enough, but the frustration of Jesus is that the sign has to point somewhere. The purpose, of course, is that it has to become interior. I know, and I think you know too, if you pay attention, signs are, on the one hand, very inclusive or social, communal, they're public. We can see signs, and they're not all spiritual. These hurricanes, they're a sign of something, right? Obviously, maybe global warming, but of course that's a political issue, so some think it's crazy and some think it's absolutely true. I don't know the final answer on that, but they are a sign of something. I do not believe, and I will say very clearly, I don't believe they're a sign of God's mad or God's getting some payback somewhere somehow. That's not it at all. It might be an environmental sign, it might be some kind of earth sign, but spiritually, if you pay attention, you could probably see a dozen signs a day. Because more pertinently, signs are personal, aren't they? One person is going to notice a favor of God or a blessing, a healing, a forgiveness, a sense of mercy, a sense of reconnecting, whatever that is. All signs are not big and loud, where we stand up and say, "Hooray, the Lord." Maybe that's what Jesus was saying. Maybe the first reading is a good example. You know the story, but allegories are sometimes hidden for a reason. The allegory is the I'll use the word conversion, or the fulfillment of the old covenant into the new. The old covenant, represented by Hagar, the slave woman, was the covenant of the law. There's no life in the law in and of itself. All the law can do is identify an offense and assign a punishment. There's no life there really at all, really. But the new woman, the woman of Jerusalem, now of course we're going to automatically think of Mary, and well, we might, but it is the fruit of Mary's womb, the new covenant, and then ultimately the covenant of the Spirit. And the Spirit can't come and can't be without the dying and the rising of Jesus, who is the sign. We are dependent on the law because we're weak creatures. We need edges and boundaries to tell us what to do and what not to do, so that when we do wrong things, we are at least told that there's a boundary, there's a line to say, that's wrong. And for the awakened, or the conscience that is aware, then we hopefully, ideally, turn ourselves back to the Lord, but that takes an action of the Spirit. We're not doing that on our own. It's the tension of grace. We usually call it the tension of guilt, but it's the tension of grace that calls us back. To that degree, then, they're important readings. I can only invite you today to notice today's signs. I think we all have signs every day. Sometimes I'm embarrassed to say that I see so many signs I hardly pay attention to them. If someone was going to ask me, well, what sign did you see today? I'd really have to stop and think. But when you pay attention and you're attentive, they're all over the place. Thank you, God, for that. The sign of Jonah, conversion. That had to be an action of God. Jonah was there, didn't want to be there, didn't want to preach the message that God wanted him to preach. He hated the Ninevites, but he did it anyway because he recognized, and I hope to some degree honored, the call and the power of God. And so he did what he knew his heart was telling him to do. He did it. Why did the Ninevites not just, kill him? They were a warring people. But the power of that sign struck their hearts. The sign was external. Jonah was the messenger. They saw him. They heard his words. But something had to happen inside that did not allow them to harm him, but they changed from the inside out. That's what signs are for. That's what they're supposed to do. Lord, in the Spirit, make it so.